Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. Want to welcome to the program Teresa Ghilarducci. She's the director of the Schwartz Center for Economic Policy Analysis at the New School, author of Work, Retire, Repeat, The Uncertainty of Retirement and the New Economy. Teresa, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So the Social Security Trust Fund report was released, I guess, last week. We actually gained a year of solvency, in part because I think the economy has grown faster than we had anticipated. And I would imagine in part, too, because of COVID, we actually lost, hundreds of thousands of people who might otherwise have been getting Social Security benefits. And we also have more people employed and paying into the system. But putting that aside, I still hear all sorts of lies, misinformation about Social Security, and it drives me nuts. It has me in comment sections and Instagram stuff that I don't even want to talk about. But let's just start. To the extent that we do have a retirement crisis, let's talk about what that crisis is.
Yes, about Social Security. The big driver for Social Security is actually not longevity. That has already been built into the system. And COVID, as much as horrific as it was, did not move the needle that much. It has to do with numbers and just the magnitude. We lost a lot of people, but we have tens of millions of people who are now on Social Security now. What matters, and this actually answers your question, to Social Security, because it matters for society, is how well we employ workers while they're working. So if we have the kind of economy we've had in the past 2 years, where lower income people are getting most of the wage increases and there's full employment, then you can fund almost any retirement system. And the insecurity of our retirement system has basically come from 40 years of wage stagnation, a lot of instability in employment between the ages of 50 and 60. So the labor market is not as a secure a place as it needs to be to have a well-funded pension system. So if we get to the very basics, economic basis of why our economic system does not produce good retirement security, that's a good start. And then one more beat is that the design of the systems we have to get people to do a rather simple thing, save while they work and draw from that income while they're retired, is broken. That system of retirement savings is broken.
Okay, and we will get into that, because that's traditionally when Social Security was introduced, it was part of a three-legged stool. That was you'd have your pension, and back then it was a defined benefit pension, and we will talk about the difference between defined benefit and defined contribution. Your Social Security and your savings that you might have. And that was it. And I want to talk in a moment as the percentage of people who are fully relying on one leg of that stool, essentially. But my understanding in terms of Social Security, the big difference, the big challenge that we're facing is in 1980, I think it was 83, or when there was the Greenspan Commission that basically expanded the trust fund, which is basically a slush fund in anticipation of the boomers generation being this big generation of potential retirees. At that time, Social Security tax was touching about 90% of the nation's aggregate income that was earned. And because of income inequality, we now are only touching about 84%. I've seen, slightly just different numbers, but that dynamic is basically what we're facing, because the cutoff now is at about $168,000. And anything above that is not taxed by the system. It's sort of an odd thing to do, but, and so many, well, not so many, but there's enough people who have so much money that is on the other side of that $168,000. So you have one person who's making, $1 million, And that means that there's not 10 other people who are making $100,000, as it were.
That's right. That's right. A lot of money has escaped the Social Security revenue stream, since 1983. So in 1983, they raised the payroll tax, and it was going to be fine for the next 75 years if the trends that they assumed would happen. And they did not assume this great inequality of income. And so the income has grown for people who have incomes above the tax. Just to make this really concrete, I calculate every year, every New Year's, how many people have already paid their Social Security tax, have made $168,000 per minute, per second, per day. Elon Musk, if you count all of his earnings, earns that in about 7 seconds. So before he puts down his second glass to cheer in the new year, he's done. He's paid his Social Security tax. Another 200 people have already paid their tax by the time they wake up and nurse their New Year's Eve, hangover. So there are more and more billionaires, millionaires, very high-end people who look to the system as a $168,000 person. And if we raise that cap, I think that's what we're getting at, there's a lot more earnings and revenue we could get to the Social Security system. Making the Social Security system solvent is not actually a economic problem. To raise the tax on higher income people would not affect, according to economists, and I am one, economic innovation, economic activity, or economic growth. There could be a political problem, is that if we raise the tax but don't raise the benefits for higher income people, they may opt out of the system. But even if we raise the tax and actually increase their benefits, we still would be net positive. So that's in the cards for Social Security. I think what you're getting at, though, is the bigger problem is, what do we do with that second tier? That tier of savings that was supposed to come from work, from defined benefit plans that are these traditional plans that pay according to your years of service and your income, and the form that's replaced it, the 401k system, which is a defined contribution. You put in money in, and whatever you put in, you take out. Both those systems have failed and fall way below certain systems, these similar systems in other countries. So we have not been doing it right according to our own standards and according to international standards.
Okay, and I want to get back to that second part, but just to close out the question of Social Security.
Yep.
One of the proposals that we also hear is, in addition to sort of like, let's just get rid of the cap, is to have a donut hole. Now that donut hole would be, okay, let's say it's at $168,000. Let's just call it $170,000 today is the thing. And then you wouldn't pay taxes on any wages that you earn from between 170 and to, I don't know, 250 or 400,000.
Yeah.
That's just simply a political thing, right? I mean, that's
Exactly.
just, okay. And because the real money is not even in between 170,000 and 400,000. It's in the, I don't know, thousands of people, it's not many more than that, who are making, over $1 million a year or something.
Or $168,000 a day,
Right. Yeah. I mean,
Right.
it's crazy money. And again, I mean, I think like you have the data that shows it's not going to impact the economy in any way. There may be some, I don't know, capital flight, supposedly, but I'm not terribly concerned about that phenomena either. And as they say, a rich man only buys one loaf of bread a day. And so Elon Musk has trouble figuring out what he's going to do with his money, and I have a good suggestion.
I think Elon Musk would not miss his money if he pays his Social Security tax on his salary, which is actually modest. It's under $1 million. So if he paid his taxes on his salary, which is just kind of technical, he wouldn't miss it. There's been no evidence that when wealthy, high-income people paid their Medicare tax throughout the whole year, that made them less loyal to Medicare. There's a lot of money in just raising the cap to 400,000 and then having people pay. Well, lifting the cap, but also protecting people under 400,000. That brings in less money. Actually, making capital gains revenue, or the kinds of income that people like Musk really depend upon, taxing that a little bit for Social Security has an economic justification and a political justification. The economic justification is it won't affect economic activity. And Social Security always was meant to have general revenues come into it. So it doesn't violate the precepts of the mission of the system to have a little bit of money coming from general revenues. And also the amount needed would not affect economic ability. One more economic argument and political argument for doing that is that when Social Security started, it already had a debt because it was paying benefits to people that never paid in. So that's a legacy debt that has always been with the system. Those with legacy wealth have a claim to pay for those with legacy debt. We didn't know where we're going to be. Are we going to have rich parents or poor parents? We had to pay Social Security benefits out to those people who have no means. The people who are wealthy now got wealthy because of the system, mainly because there was a strong Social Security system. And so taxing a little bit to pay for that legacy debt also has precedent. So Social Security really is actually kind of easy. Within the system, we can fix the system, and we have another year to do it until 2026 to do it.
And the donut hole explanation, Sam, that Sam gave, does that make it less robust or rife for, I would say, cutting it into in the future? Because when you kind of overcomplicate these systems for political realities, it means that the next administration could change the goalposts, and then it almost opens it up for further cuts, frankly.
Yeah, Emma, I'm really glad you said that. I think the donut hole is a needless complication. I'm an economist, and you'll hear this from economists. What we want is a simple, broad base and a low tax. So I would be in favor of actually lifting the cap and keeping the payroll tax as low as possible. What I really like about our system is that the taxes are low. It's only 6.2%. paid equally on the employer and the employee side. And what that means is that workers and employers have an incentive to stay in the system. When you get into crazy tax rates like 25% or 30% in Italy or all these other countries we look to because they have a big, generous safety net, you're looking at economies where a lot of people actually avoid paying taxes. And so on paper, it looks like that they have a big social welfare state and they have taxes to pay for it. In fact, so many people are cynical about paying the tax because it's so high that they escape it. So I'm in favor of keeping the tax low, broadening the base, and keeping it simple. There's a really good economic and political argument for keeping it simple.
All right, let's move on to the sort of the second part of that three-legged stool, and that And just to be clear, with a defined contribution and defined benefit, it used to be we had defined benefit pensions, which meant you put in a certain amount and you're definitely going to get this amount back. Like, if you're here for 25 years or 30 years and you retire, this is the amount that you're going to get in retirement. Defined contribution just says this is the amount that you're going to pay in, and what you're going to get out is really how lucky are you? Right.
Yeah, stock market. Right. The defined benefit system was advance funded. It was guaranteed by the employer, and the employer took the risk of whether or not the market would go up and down. But that was a good place to place that risk, because the employer had a much longer term view the employer didn't turn 65 or have to take the money out on one date like an individual does. There's a whole bunch of lives that the employer is insuring. They can stagger that liability withdrawal rate. And when you can stagger your liability timing, that means you can have a much more diverse portfolio to back that particular kind of liability. So the liability is over many, many lives with very, very different kinds of risk. That means, and you pool the money, so you have a big fund. That means you have some muscle in negotiating lower fees, and you have the ability to have a diversified portfolio. And ever since that William Sharpe won the Nobel Prize about the importance of diversification, we know what we already knew in our bones, that diversification means that you can get a much higher return for much less risk. An individual can't do that. They only have one life. They can never go back and correct the mistakes. They turn their retirement age, they turn only once on their retirement age, and they are taking all the risk, like people did in 2008, of being 58, losing your job at 58 in a worldwide recession means you can never catch up. And we are still seeing that cohort of people very insecure from their retirement with no fault of their own, because they couldn't work that extra 6 years like they thought they could. Their 401k turned into a 201k. That's not my line, but it's like the most visual thing of what can happen to you. Or as I was testifying with a Senate committee back in February, and there was a worker from the UAW sitting right beside me, and she said it well. She said, my great grandmother and grandmother and mother had a defined benefit plan, and they're living well or lived well. They weren't rich, but they knew how much money there was going to come in no matter how long they lived. And they were secure. They weren't rich, but they were secure. Me, I've worked for Ford's for 16 years, and my pension depends upon whatever the stock market's going to do whenever I have to retire. I have a lot more risk, and I want a defined benefit plan.
And right now we have half of people who are 55 to 64 have no savings.
Yeah, exactly.
Going in. Now they have Social Security for the most part.
Yeah.
We have half of 65 and over living on $30,000 a year. Yeah. 1/4 of 65 and over living on $15,000 a year. I think about half the numbers, if I remember correctly, are living exclusively on Social Security.
Yep.
And then there's another 25% where basically Social Security is keeping them out of poverty. So 3/4 of American seniors are kept out of poverty essentially because of Social Security in one form or another. How extreme that poverty would be, would be, up for a slight debate, but technically poverty. And so we need that we need at least one other leg on this,
yes.
On this benefit. Like, before we get to like what the potential solutions are, let's talk a little bit about like the retirement age, because the other big talking point we hear is we're living a lot longer than we used to.
Yeah.
Which in fact we're starting to head in the wrong direction in terms of that. But even if we grant that the average is we have a longer life, that we have a longer time in retirement, et cetera, et cetera. Will you talk about what the reality is of that and how sort of limited that statement is?
Yeah, I actually wrote my book because of that statement. The sentence that goes like this: we're all living longer, so we should work longer, is based mostly on hope and optimism and mainly ignorance. And so I interrogated the implications of that statement and just the veracity of that statement. And my book, really does take that statement seriously. And there is no evidence that we are all living longer. The average has gone up, but the average is hid very important differences. People who are likely not to have retirement savings are the ones that are going to be living the least, because the inequality of longevity and mortality has only gone up. Not only because of deaths of despair, the suicide, the opioid addictions that are affecting younger white men and women, that really brings down the average longevity, but because of the kinds of jobs that people in the lower 60% of the earnings distribution have. Jobs have not gotten any easier. I want to dispel that myth as well. And the people for whom the jobs have not gotten easier, their lives have not gotten longer. So we have a situation where we have the bottom 60% of our population having to work longer or look for work longer because they don't have the pensions, and dying sooner. So the upshot of that is an inequality of retirement time. There was an article in the New York Times today where the pictures say it all. And it's a picture of a mass of older people, just a whole bunch of over people. But some people are walled off from that mass of older people, and they're golfing and they're frolicking and they're in the swimming pool. But that tells it all, that there's an island of people who are living a retirement life, and the rest of us, especially the lower 60%, are having to work longer, or they're suffering what I call downward mobility. They were middle-class workers, and they are poor or near poor retirees. So the way to describe our retirement system is fragile and unequal.
Okay. And so a lot of times what I hear, in addition to that sort of like misunderstanding that, in fact, if you're a lawyer, if you're a podcast host, chances are that your longevity is going to be has increased dramatically relative to the podcast hosts, I guess, of 50 years ago, or the lawyers of 50 years ago. But it's just not the case if you're working, you're on your feet more, you're doing 60% of the population. But what's your response, again, on the Social Security end, and then we'll get to how we, fix, maybe come up with a solution for the pension situation, to people who say, well, let's means test it. Why is means testing a completely wasteful and useless idea in this instance?
Yeah. Let me just correct what I said simply. Almost everybody is living longer from 40 years ago, but the extra lives have not made up for the erosion of pensions. So they're not getting that extra life in terms of health or in extra retirement time. So, I just forgot your question.
It was about the idea of like, well, why don't we means test it? If
testing.
If lawyers are living longer, why don't we make them get less benefits or something?
Yeah. So a couple of reasons. One is political, and the other is economic. If you means test a program, it becomes a program for the poor. And every program for the poor is a poor program. It doesn't have any political support, and it becomes filled with tests about whether or not you deserve it. And so it just erodes in terms of its quality and its reach. The other practical issue is that if you means test, you don't get that much money. What it is better to bring in to have universal programs, and then if you got lucky enough to be wealthy, you just tax people in a progressive income tax. You don't have to go to the program to make it even less regressive. Also, a lot of well-off people get a lot already from the system because they're living longer. They're the ones that get to claim their Social Security at 70. You get a big reward to claim at 70, and then you live a longer life to get that 35% boost in your benefits compared to people who have to claim at 62. So the system is already pretty good to the well-off. To make it less good by taxing their benefit would make them just much more resentful and not get that much benefit. The best thing to do is just to lift the cap while they're working, to pay a little bit more into Social Security, and then you've actually gotten more revenue without eroding the universality of the system.
Right. And if there's I mean, as opposed to clawing back any of those, you don't need to claw back the social, and it also would add just the expense in administering the program when you already have an IRS that basically functions as a means test for society, which is if you have high means, we take a little more from you. That's it.
Take a little more on a different system. In Finland, I mean, I hate to bring up Finland because, like, who knows about Finland? It's in Scandinavia, and that's kind of imagined area. But, you know, it's a capitalist society and people want to be rich. Their Social Security system has no means test and no earnings cap and no benefits cap. They just, rich people pay into the system and they get really, really wealthy benefits. And everyone loves their system. The Dutch system, much more like the United States in terms of culture and economic structure, they also have a system that gives higher benefits to high-income people, but then everybody pays in. It's a little bit like our car insurance. Like, everybody pays in, and if you need to get car insurance, you don't get means tested about whether or not you get your car insurance test.
All right.
The Social Security really is insurance.